Hello, welcome to the next video. Before I start with the presentation, I would like to welcome David Fleischmann, or David. So we have two Davids now. David just joined recently the course because he realized that, as initially indicated, this course is not taking place in this block seminar style anymore, but has been moved as an online course. So he decided to join us later, and there was some issue with the file size, so he could not upload his introduction audio. So he just sent it to me. So I would like to introduce David to the group. A very warm welcome to this participatory method course. David, he is studying geography at the University of Vienna since 2 semesters, if I got it right. And you are mostly interested in urban geography, right? So in particular, the topic of placemaking and social segregation and how they relate to each other are topics which are of his interest. David worked before for GIZ, so he has quite some background with regards to development projects and development work, but so far not so much connections with participatory methods. So yeah, welcome to this course, and I hope it will be helpful for you. Maybe there might be something interesting method-wise also for your master thesis. All right, so let me go to the presentation. Today we will move to the next section 2, and we will talk about the principles of PRA. But before talking about the principles, I would like to give a short introduction, or maybe for some of you a recap of the principles also of social science, because they are quite interlinked. But just maybe as a first indication with regard to the principles of participatory research, this is something we really always have to keep in mind. Just being part of a research does not makes it participatory, right? So and in this small section or topic section 2, I would like to kind of work out and talk about what makes it different from other typical qualitative research approaches, that participatory approaches are really participatory and what that means. So that's kind of the goal for this whole topic section number 2. But in this video, I will give you an insight into the question, into the principles of social research, because they are closely interlinked, and part of it is very important also for participatory approaches. All right, so there are some really basic principles. So social research is not about just, what has been so interesting for me all the time, I would like to learn a bit more about this. Of course, there is a little bit of an element of interest. There always should be. We always, as researchers, should be curious and nose around and browse topics and so on. That's a very important part of it as well. But there are principles like social research has to be rule guided, and we always have to kind of show and follow these rules, and also make these rules transparent, so other researchers can understand what we did and how we did it, in order to be able to evaluate also the different work of different researchers. Otherwise, we just could go somewhere and write about interesting topics, maybe more like journalists, which is also an important work, but the journalists rather would work on very particular cases which are interesting, but not forcibly always showing a broader and a kind of real picture of social realities. So that's why we need these rules and have to follow these rules. I will come to that later in the next slide as well. The next point is documentation. This is something very, very important. And there are different ways to document our research, but social research which has not been documented loses a lot of value, because it becomes really difficult to judge in how far it's really valid and properly done. So it's a very important part of best practices of science. Yeah, and then the next issue is the proximity to the object. We cannot just sit at our desks or in our research institutions and then just talk about issues like social inequality, poverty, climate change, urban problems, and so on, if we are not really out there and really try to grasp and understand all the different aspects of it. So we have to always to find ways how to get this proximity to the object, and which enables us really to grasp and talk about the topics we want to research. And the last one is triangulation. It's a very important principle which avoids that we might find singular issues. We find them very interesting. So we always have these biases. By the way, most of you have prepared already the little task on the glossary, and it's really good, very interesting inputs, and I think it's really helpful for all of us sometimes to have a little peek. What was this again? And there are a lot of hints also for further reading. So if you guys want to learn more about the different keywords and buzzwords, you will be able to find further insights. So we might have this bias, what we think is interesting or what is relevant from our side, and in order to overcome these biases and to get a maybe more profound basis of our data, triangulation is very important, and I will talk about triangulation also in this short little input in the next slides. All right, so beside these basic principles, there had been many contributions with regard to what is important in social research, and we could spend a whole seminar only on that. But I would like to introduce to you the 13 pillars of qualitative social research, which has been presented by Philipp Meiring. This is a typical textbook on qualitative social research, and so that's why I would like to introduce it to you, because I think there is quite a lot of important aspects inside. So these 13 pillars or 13 steps, which are important which we have to consider when we do social research, can be kind of clustered into 4 different clusters. And first, when we do research, we should think about these first steps, right? So we have to find a good case-by-case basis. That's part of empirical work. We have to find our different cases. Of course, we have our research questions and topics which we are interested in mind, and then we have to find these different cases and think about how to get access to these different cases. So this cluster is all about description, describing the problem or describing the situation we are researching on. The next pillar is the openness. This openness in particular with regard to overcome these different biases which we often have. So if you're planning your research project and so on, you can have a little peek into the glossary again and look at the different biases. And it's a nice checklist to check if you have been considering these biases and But there's another part of this openness as well, like when you are really doing research, to really get into this mindset of being open and accepting, even if something sounds very strange to you. Sometimes we might also meet people we completely disagree with, yeah, right? Maybe politically or with regard to social questions and so on. We still have to have this openness in order to first accept these maybe different views and mindsets, and then in the next step try to interpret them and understand them and make sense out of it. Yeah, and the third step is very important, the method controlling. For sure, there are methods which are very often used and people could kind of come into routine, but that's quite dangerous. It's very important when we have our research questions to think about the methods and not just simply, okay, well, let's say we do this or that method and that should be fine, and then just doing it and rely on it. It's very important to test these methods and critically cross-check if they really work or not, what the problems are. That's why very often research projects have their pre-tests. This can be testing of your questionnaire. This can be testing of the different research questions. It can be a testing of the different methods. Yeah, like also the participatory methods, where you have to think about qualitative methods, quantitative methods. Yeah, you have to do this controlling, and even in between, when you are doing research for a longer time, sometimes you get into this routine mode where you are not questioning anymore if everything is kind of going in a good direction, and you might also lose the first pillar, the openness to your research subject. So that's also why in between, on the run of your research project, it's very important to have this method control and these moments. All right, so the next area which is important is the interpretation area. We need to be aware that we have these prior understandings. We have our worldviews. We have our ideas of how things should be understood and should be kind of presented and so on. And this goes very much together with the fifth pillar, the introspection. We need to be aware that we are perceiving the world very differently from person to person, and it really depends on our dispositions. It depends on our socialization, where we come from. And it's very important to be aware of that and to be critical with regard to that. And then the second part is the researcher-object interaction. Yeah, and how far there is a good way of a communicative way to also be able to cross-check the interpretations we are doing on our empirical material. Yeah, so if we are just having a very distant relationship, maybe just doing an interview, meeting these people, the participants of the interviews, maybe just very shortly, not having any time before or after the interview, getting to know each other at least to some extent. This would lead to a very distant researcher and subject interaction, but it could be also, it does not possibly have to be the participants, but also like the object you are researching on. Also there you need to get your access and your understanding and so on, so that you really can always kind of cross-check what your interpretations are with the research object or the subjects, depending a bit on what kind of research you are doing. All right, and then this leads us to the third area, which is kind of the core area of the people. We are dealing with subjects, and especially we are dealing with subjects in everyday life, right? So here the blue bars are showing it. It is actually quite important also to yeah, very often in qualitative research, we just do the research somewhere, sometimes even in a laboratory, or at the university, or in a cafe, or yeah, in different places. So it's actually very important to think first, what is our research question, and in how far it's relevant and important to meet the subjects, the participants within that everyday life setting or not. There are some issues where it may be less important, but there are a lot of topics where it's actually quite important to meet these people in the everyday life context in order to be able to understand their lives, problems, and so on. So, and here the 3 pillars: entirety. Oops, that was too quick. Entirety is important. That means that sometimes we tend to understand one side of an issue, of a subject, or of a topic, and kind of focus on that. And by doing that, we kind of forget that maybe the whole topic is much broader, and we need to understand another angle, another side of it. This pretty much goes together with the pillar of openness, where we always have to kind of ask ourselves, are we at the moment capturing the subject in its entirety? It does not mean that we have to research everything. It could be far too much, right? I mean, we have to have our focus, but within that focus which we are looking at, we always have to have this kind of mindset of cross-checking if we really have checked everything, or maybe we have overseen something very important and we have to integrate it, which may also need maybe some adjustments of methods or adjustments of people we talk to and so on. Yeah, the next step is historicity, which is not the same like history, but it's like the past experience, the past setting, the past past situations where subjects evolve out of. And we have to be aware of this, and should not only ask about what's going on at the moment, but kind of think also back where people come from, or where topics come from, objects come from, where problems come from, how did they evolve. And this evolution should always be also in our mind when we do qualitative research. Then the last one in this area is the problem orientation. Very often, okay, that's the goal and the task of research, to kind of find solutions for problems, and that's why yeah, we might be more interested in problems than in other issues. All right, and then the last one is then the question with regards to generalization, and then kind of how to get out of the research we are doing a final a report, a publication, final thesis, and so on, right? So in this process, it's quite important to have an argumentative generalization, which basically means that in qualitative social research, we are following an interpretive paradigm already, right? So the basic idea is not that there is somehow this one singular social reality and this one is the only true reality. Social realities are always constructed. They're constructed by, as I said in the first input on the background on social science, they're constructed by the people we are doing research with, and they're also constructed by the researchers. Very often by the researchers, because they have a lot of power, the power of writing, the power of explaining and so on, the expertise. So it's very important that when we make these generalizations, and here we can, I would like also to give a little hint with regard to the 11th pillar as well. On the glossary, there is an entry on deduction and induction. You might find some some interesting points with regard to that as well. So it's very important to really lay down how you come to this generalization, and that's why it's very important to have enough space also when you write scientific publications, to have enough space to discuss how the whole process of coming from the description all the way down to the generalization and finding these patterns and rules in our questions. Yeah, the induction, I think most of you know this principle. Qualitative social research is pretty much linked to induction. Then we have to have rule concepts. This basically means, is like from the slide before, our research has to be rule guided, but they are not like these one-fit-all rules. They are not rules for all type of research, but you have to be aware of your own rules. Sometimes there are rules which you make for yourself, but you have to write them and be very transparent about the rules, how you did your coding, how you did your interpretation, and so on. And very often this is done with so-called memos. When you're working, for example, very often social scientists work with software programs for coding, for qualitative analysis, for example, Atlas TI or MaxQDA. And here you would kind of document all these rules and the concepts of your different codes, for example, with memos. And yeah, this rule concept is very important. And yeah, to some extent also even for qualitative research, quantification is a goal. So because sometimes we really realize that in some issues they are very similar pattern, and then we can try, even if we are having like qualitative data, we can try to kind of quantify, at least to some extent, the results we are having. All right, so that's it with regard to the 13 pillars. And here I pointed out which of these, I mean, all of them are kind of important for participatory approaches and research, but with these stars I just pointed out those who are especially particularly important for PIA, which is the openness, the researcher object interaction. In this case, very usually it's researcher subject interaction, problem orientation, and the augmentative generalization. But this part is like one of the core qualities of participatory rule appraisal. Compared to many other typical qualitative social research approaches, in participatory approaches, this part is far more closely done with the participants themselves, and not just the researchers with other researchers. And so on. So yeah, those are the important parts. Last slide for this input would be on triangulation. So triangulation comes from the triangle, which basically means, okay, we are looking at an issue from at least 3 sides. But triangulation sometimes is also seen to originate from the seafarers for navigation, right? You need 3 points at the coastline in order to precisely find your position. And somehow this is the similar concept. In research, you try to find different angles from which you are looking at a certain topic. And that's how you really try to refine your position, or actually your findings, your results, and your generalizations, so that they become more viable, and so on. I mean, there also had been a discussion about in how far triangulation is really kind of a process of validating. Some people are arguing it's not a way of validating. Others argue, yeah, it's still. Those who argue it's not, they say it's more like a adding more content to the same topic. Others say no, if you really compare these different angles, you find a more precise picture of the core issue you're looking at. And you can do this triangulation with regard to different different dimensions. One is the methods. Yeah, you can use different methods. You can use interviews. You can use questionnaires. You can use different participatory methods, visualized methods, and so on. This list is not a full list. So you would work on a topic, let's say on violence experience in certain areas in a city. So you could go to this, let's say there is a particular place or neighborhood where violence is an important problem, and then you could use interviews, you could use questionnaires, and yeah, like these different methods in order to get a better picture and understanding of what is going on. But you can also do that with regard to the sources, right? So you can talk only to the neighbors who are living there, but you could also talk to so-called experts, for example, social workers who are living in that area, or police officers, or local politicians, or yeah, you name it. So with regard to the different target groups and experts, which might give you information about your topic you're talking about, but also documents and artifacts, right? Sometimes you don't only find the situation information about your topic in direct communication with subjects, with people, but objects can also give you a lot of hints, and that's maybe a blind spot which participatory approaches often really do not focus on, is on on these objects which can tell a lot about your research questions, as well as the unreflected behaviors and so on. Usually they are not that much captured with PIA or participatory methods, and many other methods also in social science in general. So this is also something we should keep in mind when we are doing our research. And the last dimension is also with regard to theory. I mean, even though we are working very often with induction, this does not mean that we are doing it without any theories, hypothesis, or pre-existing knowledge in mind, right? So we are having these assumptions beforehand. So you can also do this triangulation by having your hypothesis, and then it's very important, and that's something which very often is forgotten, and it happened to me also quite sometimes. When you're doing research, very often you kind of discover new aspects which are very important for your overall research objective. And then for you, it seems very logical. Oh, yeah, okay, that's, in my case, are the migrants, they do this because of that. For me, it's quite logical. And because then for me, the explanation is so logical, and then I may find some people kind of agreeing to that and then second that. It is very important always to kind of find a counter hypothesis and to cross-check that. And that's a very important element of triangulation. All right, so that's it with regard to the principles of social research. I did that a bit more quickly because I think most of you have the background on with regard to that. So this is just a little refreshment as well. And yeah, in the next video, I will come to the principles of participatory research. So yeah, I hope you're all doing well. Stay interested in all these topics, and see you in the next video.